We are going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. Today, we are going to hear all about local food purchasing incentives. And this is the first out of two state program flash talks. And so we're going to hear from representatives in this flash talk series about efforts in their states to incentivize local food in school meals, whether that's an introduced bill or a pilot program or a full-blown established incentive program. We're going to hear about different experiences throughout the nation. My name is Cassandra Bull. I am a policy consultant and your flash talk host today. I am consulting with Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems, and my collaborator there is Colleen Matz, who is the Farm to Institution Specialist. And this is a joint project with National Farm to School Network, and our collaborators there are Karen Spangler and Sunny Baker. And we have 6 presenters from 5 states for this first flash talk. We will be featuring Stacy Purslow of New Hampshire Farm to School, Robin Kerber of Full Plates, Full Potential, representing Maine, Cheryl Belinsky of Cornell Cooperative Extension, Harvest, New York, Amy Garfinkel of California Department of Food and Ag, and then we have Cyrena Thibodeau and Monica Pacheco, both from Connecticut, representing the Departments of Agriculture and Education, respectively. So our agenda, I'm going to share a little bit about local food purchasing incentives and our projects. Then we'll have the 5 flash talks, and then we'll wrap up the hour with a Q&A. So a little bit about local food purchasing incentives. These are programs that provide additional funding to directly offset the cost of local foods. They are typically funded and operated at the state level, and they intend to increase purchasing of local foods in school and or early childcare and education settings. So basically, state agencies are giving direct, actual money to child nutrition programs if and so that they can purchase from local farmers and food producers. And if there's anything I can share, it's that each incentive program is uniquely designed and administered. But really, we have 2 different main categories of incentives. They are traditional and expanded programs. So traditional incentives provide a specific reimbursement rate for child nutrition programs if they qualify for an incentive. And what this really means is that they typically only incentivize food costs, whereas expanded programs are typically grant-style programs that fund farm-to-school activities like staff training, equipment, and expenses for education, in addition to local food purchases. Here's a map of states that have implemented incentive programs. So pre-pandemic, starting in 2001 with Maine, all the way to 2019, we had 9 states establish incentives. And then post-pandemic, in just 2020 to 2023, we had 7 new states adopt programs in some shape or form. And I show you that distinction just to share that there's really a rapid growth and attention to local food purchasing incentives across the nation. And we see a policy window for incentive programs because of this growing adoption. In addition, the USDA, the Local Food for Schools Cooperative Agreement, which is rolling out this year, is very similar to these sort of incentive program models that we're talking about. And also a new growing statewide policy, universal free meals, are sweeping the nation. And some of them include actually provisions that incentivize local food purchasing directly in them. So all of that is really interesting around incentives. And so here we have this project with MSU, Center for Regional Food Systems, and National Farm to School Network. Our goal is to support incentive stakeholders in all phases of development, whether that's planning, all the way to if they've been implementing their program for a decade. We also seek to increase awareness of incentives for general audiences and increase connections between state practitioners to facilitate shared learning. And through that, we have a series of webinars like today and some additional resources that are in development and coming soon. I want to share, in case you're really interested in incentive programs, some resources that are already out there. The first is a landscape analysis and state program overview compendium, which is my personal research I released last October, which goes through the design, landscape, different goals, different contexts of these programs. Next, we have MSU Center for Regional Food Systems conducted a national survey about the interest of incentives from different stakeholders and published that last fall as well. And then we have a tried and true resource, which is National Farm to School Network State Policy Handbook, which gives more than incentives, all state policies that relate to farm to school between 2002 and 2020 in all US states and territories. I also wanted to share some other projects that are happening around incentives. One is a multi-state collaborative project that explores the impacts of state incentives, and that's spearheaded by Colorado State University. And we have a relatively new Northeast Incentives Community of Practice, which is spearheaded by NOPA Vermont. And then we have the Farm to Institution Metrics Collaborative, which is nationally focused. And it's not necessarily about incentives, but a lot of folks in the call are incentive practitioners, and we talk about metrics and tracking and all things like that. So I also want to leave you with that this is the first of 2 sessions. Our next session is on Monday, and there will be highlighting representatives from Colorado, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Utah, and Vermont. And then later this month, we have a local food tracking software discussion for incentive program practitioners. Okay, so that was the introduction. And now I'm going to turn it over to Stacy Perslow, who is the program coordinator at the University of New Hampshire Sustainability Institute. They run the New Hampshire Farm to School program, and she will be talking about the Farm to School reimbursement program. Okay, Stacy, take it away.
Thanks, Cassandra. Can you do the next slide? So I wanted to give a little context about New Hampshire because all of these points influence our bill design and have an effect on our bill. So New Hampshire has the second largest legislature in the country behind Congress. We have 400 representatives and 24 senators. Our state population is 1.4 million. Most farms in the state bring in an annual income of less than $10,000. 7% of our land is farmed, so about 425,000 acres, and that's not all fruit and vegetables. Most of the biggest crops are hay and Christmas trees, so vegetable and fruit crops are much less. All but 2 of our counties, our 10 counties, border other states and countries. And we also have 3 cross-border school districts where kids might go K-8 in New Hampshire and go to high school in another state, or the opposite. Another state might, we have a couple of Vermont, K-8 in Vermont that might come to New Hampshire to go to high school. Next slide. So some background. So as Cassandra said, we currently do not have an incentive program, and we've been working on one for a couple of years. So in 2018, 2019, New Hampshire was working to establish a state farm to school network. And within that network, we had some working groups, including a policy group. So as part of the policy group work, we decided that we would like to do an incentive bill. So we developed that bill and the bill language in 2020, with plans to introduce the bill for the 2021 legislative session. But then, of course, COVID was there, and money was, the government was hurting for money. We didn't, everybody didn't know what was going on. And since we were asking the state for money to fund this, it was advised not to submit it during that legislative session. So we had to wait. So then we reintroduced it for the 2022 session, and it failed in the House Education Committee. So all bills are assigned to a committee, and they have to pass through that committee in order to go for a full vote. But it failed in that House Education Committee. In the fall of 2022, we revised the bill language and reintroduced it earlier this year. Again, went to the Education Committee and passed with a 10-10 tie, which doesn't mean much. That's the way it goes. If it's tie, it goes forward. But it was a tie without any recommendation. So it's not like an ought to pass. It didn't go that way. So it failed on the House floor. So now we're just reconvening and but at that time, they allowed it to be laid on the table. Terminology means you can bring it back again. It's not like it just failed and then we have to wait until 2025. So we can bring it back for the second year of our 2-year legislative section. So that's what we're working on right now. Next slide. So some bill details. We originally took a tiered approach for qualifying purchases, meaning we wanted to certainly support New Hampshire agriculture, but if you saw the statistics about New Hampshire agriculture, that we don't grow that much here. And we have cross-state school districts and, food hubs and farmers, sell and buy from across state. So we wanted to support New England agriculture as well. And we also have other initiatives that are happening in this part of the country with the was 50 by 60, the food vision produced 50% of our food by 2060. It's now like, I think it's 30 by 30, produce 30% of our food by 2030. And we have a lot of collaboration across as a region, looking at our whole food system, not just our state food systems. So a tiered program would help to support some of our larger regional goals, as well as just be real. Right now our schools get food from California and Florida, and we can't produce enough food in New Hampshire. We need other states. Why not support, regional agriculture with our bill? So it was originally spend $3 on New Hampshire grown or produced foods and get $1 back, up to $1,200, or spend $6 on food from other New England states and get $1 back. We didn't have fluid milk because we knew, schools would go for that. Oh, let's just do our milk. Like, well, that defeats the whole purpose of this bill because it won't support all of the diverse agriculture that we would like it to. All schools were eligible, and the program was going to be housed in our New Hampshire Department of Education, which oversees the National School Lunch Program. So that was the basics of our first bill. When we introduced it earlier this year, we removed the tiered purchasing. Some of the legislators thought, like, how are you going to track that? How are you going to know if it's an out-of-state purchase? How do you know if, like, a farmer, because one particular legislator, he's got Vermont folks farming in New Hampshire. Like, how do you track that? So there was some details like that about tracking, like, how do you know it's going to be New Hampshire or New England? And then our DOE originally said they couldn't do the program without support for a person to run it. So 2023, we removed the tiered purchasing and we added in funds to support a person running the program. But again, obviously it failed. So rethinking it for the next year, we may run a pilot program with a smaller funding ask from the state. We want to go back to include that tiered purchasing. And then it may be housed at our Department of Agriculture. They are currently running our local food for schools cooperative agreement that probably most of you have. So they've got some experience now for this upcoming school year about, working with schools and farmers and doing like paying schools and things like that. So I'm working with them to see if they'll do it, only because our DOE is not in the greatest shape right now. And so they may want to do that. So we had some good partners with our work, including NOFA New Hampshire, the Organic Farming Association of New Hampshire. With my position at the university, I am limited on what I can do as far as, advocacy and lobbying. Although I probably, cross that line with this bill. But so they have just agreed to be like the face of the bill. Like, you can go to their website to find information about the bill. I'm using them as sort of the vehicle for the bill, even though I'm still doing a lot behind the scenes. New Hampshire Hunger Solutions, statewide organization, New Hampshire Food Alliance, which is our state food system network, Monadnock Farm and Community Coalition, which is a regional organization. We have some co-op food stores, including the Lebanon and Hanover food stores, Hanover where Dartmouth University is, but they do a lot of policy work. The League of Conservation Voters and also Save the Children have been involved with helping us do some advocacy work on behalf of the bill. Oh, can you go back 1 second? Okay. So other considerations for the bill, funding to provide training for school food service if they need more, kitchen skills. We're going to try to figure out how to leverage the cooperative agreement funds to help make the case for this incentive bill. And we talked about how, this pilot program, how are we going to determine what schools get to participate. So we don't have that all figured out, but one idea we landed on was that schools, one school from each county might be able to apply. So that could serve our rural northern places, plus some of our more urban school districts in the South. Am I good on time, Cassandra?
Yes, we're gonna move forward. Thank you so much, Stacy, for sharing about your experiences in New Hampshire. That was great. Okay, next we're going to hear from Robin Kerber, who is the implementation manager of Full Place, Full Potential, and she'll be talking about the Local Foods Fund.
Awesome. Thank you, Cassandra. So I am very new to Full Plates, Full Potential, but the job that I held for close to 4 years prior to was within the Department of Education here in Maine as the pharmacy to school coordinator. So I'm excited to talk about the fund that I'm very familiar with. You could do the next slide, Cassandra. So the Local Foods Fund is a reimbursement program where we reimburse $1 for every $3 spent on select local foods. And we define local here in Maine as from within the state or within the Gulf of Maine. And every district qualifies, and we have money for every district. So it's not competitive in that nature. Every school district is eligible to receive up to $5,000 reimbursed per school year, or an additional $500 reimbursed if they participate in a local foods training administered by the Department of Education. And so our fund was established in 2001, but it was there was no fiscal note and it was really underutilized. So the Maine Farm to School Network and a lot of state partners wanted to make sure that this fund was being used because it's such a great way to support schools and farms. So in 2019, the position for the pharmacy to school coordinator, which I recently held, and it's still open, so there's a plug for that awesome job, was created, and there was a fiscal note with the bill. So suddenly there was several $100,000 to support this work, and it really started to expand and really has since then. And in school year 21, the Local Foods Fund changed from the Local Produce Fund, which was what it was for the initial 20 years, to the Local Foods Fund. And these changes were based on some surveys that we did for the field to really figure out why the fund was being underutilized, what were the barriers. And I will preface this presentation by saying that it's a constant evolution, and every year we're reassessing what's working, what's not working, because we want it to work for everybody. So we increased the cap per district to 5,000. We added value-added dairy and protein as qualifying ingredients. And we also added the ability to buy directly from a food distributor. So prior to that, you had to buy directly from a farmer, and we found that to be a barrier. So now schools can buy their local foods from the larger food distributors that they're already purchasing from. And the definition of minimally processed changed slightly, but in this past legislative session, there was an amendment to the bill that passed to add a definition for processed items. And so the Department of Education is working on that right now with state partners to create a system where schools and farmers and producers can submit items to get qualified by the department that fit outside of this very restrictive definition of minimally processed. So we're looking at items like salsa, marinara sauce, bread, and looking closely at other states and how they define these qualifying ingredients, in particular, looking at New York and states that have that 51% locally grown, but it's a work in progress, but we're really hoping that expanded definition of qualifying foods helps the fund grow even more. Next slide, please. So as far as the not so fun, but the very important tracking of the fund that the DOE does, basically schools submit their receipts and invoices as part of their monthly claim. And then internally on the DOE side, they review the receipts and the summary page to make sure that the items that they're seeking partial reimbursement for meet our definition. And so what we're looking for is we want to see either the name of the Maine farm so we can easily trace it that way, the name, the word Maine next to the item if it's from a larger distributor. And honestly, sometimes we accept, the bag that the potatoes came in that say Maine grown. Like it's really just, we want to see that it's a Maine product because this fund, it supports schools, but it also really needs to support our Maine farmers, producers, and fishermen. So then once the DOE approves those receipts, they reimburse the schools, and then they also make sure they track that data. And so when I held the position, I did the often very tedious, mind-numbing data tracking of keeping track of all of the ingredients that schools were buying and the amount that they were spending on those ingredients. And it really felt like valuable data that we were getting and an accurate picture on what local procurement looks like in Maine, more so than any other information collection that was going on, whether that was from a larger farm to school census or anything else. So that data, I would say if there's any way that you can have the capacity to track it, it's so valuable, especially for the farmer side when they want to know what schools are buying and what they should be growing if they want to get into that market. So just looking at school year 22, the DOE reimbursed over $125,000 to over 70 Maine school districts that spent over $375,000 on local foods from almost 100 farms. So that was really exciting. And for a little context, before this was the first school year that it became the local foods fund. Prior to that, it was the local produce fund. And the DOE reimbursed a little over $35,000. So you can see a tremendous increase in the amount of money that the DOE was giving back to schools, huge increase in local procurement, which is ultimately what we want to see as we take the time to make these changes. Next slide, please, Cassandra. So this is just a sample of the procurement data that I collected, and you can see that I categorized it to match up with our Harvest of the Month program. But then I also dove a little deeper into the different categories. So for example, root vegetables, I also tracked all the different varieties of root vegetables. So when I was talking to a farmer who wanted to sell to schools, radish, rutabaga, maybe not a great sell. Grow carrots. Schools are buying carrots. Schools love carrots. And this data is just so valuable, like I said, in those conversations with the farmers. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that the Maine Farm to School Network, really robust group of organizations in the state, is really instrumental in moving this fund forward, making changes, a lot of great partners there, and is a huge reason why Farm and Seed to School is so strong here in Maine. And so we've got partners like Full Plates where I work that is strong with advocacy, getting those surveys to the field, figuring out what's working, what's not working with the fund. And then of course, the support that Department of Education offers with that coordinator position, such a vital role. That's a full-time position, 100% focused on farm and seed to school. That makes a huge difference. They offer local foods trainings. They have a culinary classroom right in their building where school nutrition staff and farmers can come in, work together using these ingredients, grow those culinary skills. And then just in general, Maine, we've got such a strong culture and identity that supports local farms, and farm and seed to school kind of fits into that really, really well. So just setting up the farmers, the buyers, and everybody for success. That is probably my time. So there's my email there, but thank you so much.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much, Robin. I really like the fact that Maine's program has evolved over time. I think that's something we can all look to, in that you're responding in what works and what doesn't and making the appropriate changes. So thank you so much for sharing more about that. And next, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl Belinsky, who is the State Farm to School Lead at Cornell Cooperative Extension. And she will be talking about the 30% New York State initiative. Cheryl.
Thank you, Cassandra. I think we can jump right to the next slide. So the 30% initiative is in its 5th year right now, and I've been supporting the program since inception. It launched in 2018 as a part of the No Student Goes Hungry initiative, and there were other things baked into that initiative as well. It is funded annually at $10 million in the Aid to Localities bill and the New York State budget. It is administered by the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets and has been for the last 18 or so months. Previously, it was administered by the Department of Education. It is a performance-based incentive program, and I'll talk a little bit more when I get into the mechanics of the program. The goals of the program are simple but important. It's to support New York farmers and to provide healthy, locally sourced food to students. Next slide, please. The mechanics of the program are as such: school food authorities that spend 30% of their lunch budget on New York products receive an additional 19 cents per reimbursable lunch served, for a total of 25 cents in state reimbursement. And the words that are bolded there are important for a number of different reasons that I'll get into. First, this is tethered to the National School Lunch Program specifically. A New York food product is formally defined and has been since inception of the program. And the maximum state reimbursement that a school food authority can receive under this legislation is 25 cents. Next slide. It's a reimbursement-based program, so this is just a high-level overview of the program. So SFAs are purchasing qualifying products in September to June. It follows the school year. Summer is not included. In August, they apply to the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. They're reviewed, and if their application is approved, they start receiving their reimbursement in the following school year and throughout the school year, so September to June. And the reimbursement, again, is based on lunch participation, specifically average daily participation. What's hopefully happening in that latter September to June is they're receiving their reimbursement, and they're also making qualifying purchases for the following year to be reimbursed the following year. Next slide. So a New York food product, as I mentioned, is formally defined. It is a food item that is grown, harvested, or produced in New York, or it's processed in or outside of New York, but it's comprised of over 51% agricultural raw materials. So this definition ties back to the source of the ingredients. We have a handful of different products that are available that cover the entire meal pattern, that cover every single commodity group, although the top products purchased based on 1920 data, and I'll drop a link to the report that this references later on, are not surprisingly apples. We're a big apple state in New York, so whole apples, apple slices, lettuce. We have hydroponic lettuce available year round. And then again, not surprisingly, on the processed side, milk is our #1 processed ingredient, big dairy state. We also have a lot of Concord grape juice products available as well. But again, we have products that cover the entire meal tray. We have a lot of animal-based proteins. We have more plant-based proteins coming online as well. Next slide. This is a high-level overview based on 4 years. So we're going into our 5th year. Our schools are applying right now, probably as I'm speaking. So this is based on 4 years of data. We've had 16 school districts 64 school districts participate in this program to date. That's roughly 7% of total SFAs across New York. And that might seem low to some, but I just want to point out that we probably all know you don't walk into an incentive program overnight. So a lot of our schools are scaling up to be successful in this program. And I also want to note that 2 out of the 4 years of our program were COVID years. And to me, it's a testament to success on our behalf of our school food partners that they hung in through the program during those COVID years, which were obviously very challenging. We've had 66% of our SFAs have qualified for 3 out of the 4 years. We see a lot of repeat customers, and we celebrated 6 new successes in last year alone. And the dots on the right are just a spatial representation of the schools that have been successful. We've had 2 that have been successful all 4 years, and those are the red dots in the western part of the state. Next slide. Again, high-level numbers on the 30% spend and 30% reimbursement to date. So our program launched in 18-19. We had 7 SFAs apply. They spent $2.9 million, and they received $754,000 in reimbursement the following year. Again, it's a reimbursement program. I'm not going to go through these numbers line by line, but you can look that total 30% spend to date, not including this school year, was over 18 million, and reimbursement to date has been is close to 6 million. Something I do want to point out here, in the previous slide, I mentioned that the 30% is tethered to the National School Lunch Program, and that has resulted in some unintended consequences. And we see that represented here in the 30% reimbursement program, specifically in the 1920 and the 2021 school year. Most school food authorities, at least in New York, elected to operate the summer food service program during those pandemic years. And that is not an extension of the National School Lunch Program like the seamless summer option. So words really matter is really what I'm getting at. Because most of our schools operated SFSP over SSO, they actually weren't eligible to receive their reimbursement, even though they made the qualifying purchases. And that was due to a legal read of the law. And that's why 2021 reimbursement is so low. We actually only had 2 SFAs get their reimbursement out of the 57 that qualified. So that's been a lesson learned for us here in New York. Next slide. Some high-level takeaways. I think the most important one that I can make is that technical assistance and resource development is absolutely critical to success. So our Department of Agriculture and Markets has been a tremendous partner and supporter of this work. Before the incentive even existed, they launched their own New York State Farm to School grant program, and they've awarded over $7.1 million to 61 school food authorities and nonprofits since 2015. They also recognize the need for support, technical assistance to assist in procurement related activities across the supply chain. And as such, they invest annually in the Regional Farm to School Coordinator Program. That's $500,000 they invest. That's actually the program that I have the pleasure of overseeing. And I have 8 coordinators, 100% FTE, more or less, working across the state to support procurement related activities across the supply chain. Happy to talk with anyone about that model if they're interested. We also have access to 2 farm to school institutes, and they've been really valuable. We have the New York Institute, which is administered by American Farmland Trust, and New England allows New York to tag along and accepts a few schools every single year as well. Research and evaluation has been really important to our work, and I'll drop the link or it might be dropped right now in the chat box to some research that both Cornell and American Farmland Trust have spearheaded over the years, but constant research and evaluation of the program to inform policy changes, but also programmatic changes as well. We have an advocacy organization, the New York Grown Food for New York Kids Coalition, that brings the ask of the coalition in front of Albany, and they make those policy asks annually. And it's based on feedback, research, evaluation received from coalition members and the village at large, if you will. And I'm going to skip over product databases because I'm going to talk about those quickly on the next slide. So that's your cue, Cassandra. So both Ag and Markets in Cornell have programs and resources that work with one another to reduce the administrative burden on SFAs, school food authorities, namely as it relates to tracking while ensuring supply chain transparency. And these are just two examples. So we at Harvest New York manage a 30% product database. I think that'll be dropped in chat as well. That's kind of a one-stop shop for school food authorities to find qualifying products and get the paperwork that they need. And Ag and Markets administers the New York State Grown and Certified program, which I can explain in further detail to anyone who wants to know or connect you with a program manager there. But that's been a tremendous resource for our school food authorities and producers across the state in being successful in this program and beyond. Next slide. The other high-level takeaways that I'm not going to have time to dig into, but again, I would invite anyone to reach out. I'm happy to share what we've learned in New York. But a pervasive challenge is striking a balance between program integrity and the administrative burden of the program. We need to make sure that the products are actually from New York, but the paperwork can't be so onerous that our school food authorities don't want to participate in it. And it's a balance. And so we do a lot with technical assistance and resource development to try to mitigate that, but it's something that we're consciously aware of and trying to work towards. The third takeaway is that legislative language and program design can have unintended consequences. I mentioned the National School Lunch Program. Not sure how that's going to change, but we never could have foreseen that schools switching to another child nutrition program wouldn't get their reimbursement. That is not something any of us wanted in New York, but that's just the way it stood based on, again, a legal read of that law. And then we're running into this now, and I definitely don't have time to get into it, but allied pieces of legislation can adversely affect one another. So I mentioned that our law states that school food authorities can only receive 25 cents in state reimbursement under the 30%. There's another piece of legislation that passed that's going into effect that's going to give states additional money for CEP participation. And it could have an adverse effect on the 30% reimbursement that they get. Again, nobody ever could have predicted that this would happen, but it's just something to be mindful as your states are creating pieces of legislation. Make sure that they work in tandem and not against one another for sure. And
excellent.
That's it.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Yeah, I've said this before, but the New York 30% initiative is part of the reason why I got so curious about the whole national landscape of incentives. So it's really great to hear you speak about that program to this audience. So thanks again. And I'm going to pass it to Amy Garfinkel, who is the Farm to School Network Lead at the California Department of Food and Agriculture's Office of Farm to Fork. And Amy will be speaking about the Farm to School Incubator Grant.
Thank you, Cassandra. Hi, everyone. Next slide, please. So a brief overview of the California Farm to School Incubator Grant Program. The overarching goal is to award competitive grants to support projects that cultivate equity, nurture students, build climate resilience, and create scalable and sustainable change across the school food system. The program takes a systems approach to funding farm to school. So there are 4 different funding tracks within the program. The first track is track 1. It's funding K12, and I'll dig into this one a little bit more later. The second track is funding regional or statewide partnerships that are having a broader impact on farm to school. Track 3 is the early care and education track. So it's funding farm to ECE activities. And then track 4 is the farm to school producer track. So it's funding food producers to produce and distribute foods for schools. Next slide. This is a short history of the program. So in California, the Budget Acts of 2020, 2021, and 2022 each allocated money for the California Department of Food and Agriculture to first establish and then sustain and expand the California Farm to School Incubator Grant Program. So these are state funds. In 2021, that was the inaugural year of the grant program, and the Department of Food and Ag awarded $8.5 million to 60 projects across the state. And this was both for K12 projects and partnership projects, so tracks 1 and 2. Then in 2022, the second round and most recent round of the grant program, the Department of Food and Ag this time awarded $25.5 million to 120 projects across the state. And this included, again, K12 and partnership projects, as well as 2 new funding tracks. So it also funded the ECE and producer projects. Additionally, I just wanted to note that and $4.5 million in addition to this $25.5 million in 2022 is going toward grant admin as well as a grant evaluation for the program, which is exciting. And then in 2023, there will be a $60 million allocation, and I wrote coming soon because the timeline is still TBD on that one. Next slide, please. So delving a little bit deeper into track 1, the K12 funding track, this is a reimbursement grant program. It funds both farm to school procurement as well as farm to school education. And eligible entities are, this is based on the 2022 grant round. Eligible entities are public school districts, county offices of education, and directly funded charter schools in California that serve as a school food authority and operate the National School Lunch Program and or School Breakfast Program. Next slide, please. This track, it funds a broad array of costs. So it currently can fund things like farm to school education, say field trips to farms or school garden activities. It can also fund farm to school staff and labor costs to implement the procurement and education goals. So perhaps a farm to school coordinator in a district. It can fund farm to school professional development for staff, as well as school kitchen equipment to process and prepare and serve California grown foods in school meals. And it can fund contractors to help implement the procurement and education farm to school goals. And then perhaps most relevant to this conversation today, this track can fund California grown or produced whole or minimally processed foods for use in either school meals or in student education, like a Harvest of the Month taste test as an example. And it especially funds foods that are not only California grown or produced whole or minimally processed, but also culturally relevant, climate smart, and from small to mid-sized veteran, socially disadvantaged, and or limited resource food producers in California. And that word especially refers to how in the scoring criteria for this track, applicants could receive additional points for incorporating foods from these producers into their projects. Next slide, please. This is a visual of our farm to school team at the California Department of Food and Ag. So we're really lucky to have a large and growing team of full-time farm to school staff. And I wanted to highlight this because our team is able to provide support to grant recipients throughout the grant term to support with project implementation. So we have a few statewide staff as well as regional staff throughout the state, and the regions are color-coded on this map. And the regional staff provide one-on-one tailored support to grantees for their projects. The regional staff are also working to develop regional farm to school networks to foster collaboration and peer learning. And they're working to foster connections between food producers and school nutrition departments. Next slide, please. Finally, I wanted to make sure to mention that this Farm to School Incubator grant program that the Department of Food and Ag implements in California is one method that in California of funding local food purchasing in schools. So these 4 other programs are programs that the California Department of Education administers. So one is the Local Food for Schools funding from USDA, and there's about $23 million for that in California. Additionally, through state funding, the Department of Education is administering a $100 million School Food Best Practices Fund, which funds a variety of things related to school meals, including California grown or produced whole or minimally processed foods. Over the past few years, there has also been about $750 million in state funds for kitchen infrastructure and training in schools. And then as well, the California Department of Education is administering the California Universal Meals Program. So yeah, thanks so much for listening. That's a little overview of local food purchasing in California.
Thanks so much, Amy. Yeah, I think something to highlight about California and your amazing program is how it focuses on transformation of school food. So investing in infrastructure and education and all things farm to school, I think is a really unique way to support local food purchasing too. So thanks for highlighting these programs and your work in California. Okay, and our last flash talk, we are going to feature representatives from Connecticut, the most recently established local food purchasing incentive. So we have Cyrena Thibodeau and Monica Pacheco from Connecticut, who will share about the Local Food for Schools incentive program. All right, please take it away.
Okay, hi, good afternoon, good afternoon, everyone, at least here in Connecticut. I thank you all for the opportunity to present on this. It's so interesting to hear all the different programs, and I kind of love how we're segueing from California and a large program in a large state to good old little Connecticut here. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to start things off. I worked obviously for the Department of Education. And so we're going to start off with what the federal funding has kickstarted for us in Connecticut. So as Amy referenced, you know, some of the different funding sources also available and others as well. We're using our local foods for school purchasing agreement as our local food for school incentive program, almost as a pilot program. So it is being administered by the Department of Education. And if everyone recalls, and I can just go through a couple basic things with this program, is that these are federal funds that are coming out of the Commodity Credit Corporation, the CC of USDA, which does require that these products are spent, these dollars rather, are spent on either unprocessed or minimally processed foods. So there is no overhead for this. And so that's something that we had to take into consideration when we decided to turn this into sort of an incentive program pilot. Luckily, we have lots of partnerships here in Connecticut, being a small state and being that we don't have one specific farm to school staff person in any one agency quite yet. We're working on it. I'm lucky to be well supported by our Department of Agriculture, our cooperative extension program, and a lot of our nonprofit partners in the state to provide some of the supports that we need to help make those connections and do the administrative side of our program here. And we are very much at the beginning, at the cusp of starting ours. We have received approval to have a two-phase program for our incentives. So the first one involved in Connecticut had about $1.873 million awarded. So you can see in comparison to, say, California, who I think talked about 23 million, you know, the size is dramatically different, but we're thrilled to have this funding. So our first phase is going to use about half of that to sort of fair share out funds to every school district. So we're using a base number of $2,000 per district so that even our smallest districts have some appreciable funds to work with. And then we did prorate it based on enrollment to allow schools then to get additional dollars for our larger districts, of course. We have set some parameters such as the fact that we are trying to go for 80% Connecticut grown and 20% regional. And we are rolling out this first phase as we speak. Literally, I have information sessions scheduled next week and the week after. We've just gotten everyone signed on, and we're going to start this fall. We did get the extension so that we will run our program until April of 2025. We asked for the one-year extension that's allowable within the within this grant or this funding. And then, so we are just on the cusp of getting started. We will be tracking. We are sort of, as I like to say, building the plane while we're flying it here. So I would love to see more about some of the tracking tools people are using, because we do recognize that this is such a great opportunity to start getting some real hard data that has been difficult to gather. And as others referenced, there's some other methods out there, but this would really be what are they actually purchasing. So we're excited about that. We are setting a few parameters also that they cannot use fluid milk as one of their local products. We have a lot of supply chain assistance funds coming into the state. And I know everyone's probably aware round 4 is about to hit all the states. And that's also CCC funding. So it's also only for minimally processed foods. And they do allow the fluid milk there. So we feel like that's well covered if folks are still looking to utilize their dairy purchase, their fluid milk purchase. And otherwise, I am going to then segue off to Cyrena from Department of Ag, who's going to talk about then some state level work that's happening here in Connecticut.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Monica. And if you want to move to the next slide. Thank you. Just want to echo Monica first off that it is really, really amazing to hear from all of the other states this time that have programs going on. Really looking forward to next time. I will definitely be in touch with all of you because we are kind of in the in-between state of we have some legislation passed, but we're waiting on a lot of information still, and we haven't really been able to delve into too much kind of designing the program and how it would be implemented. So the state level incentive program just passed this legislative session, which is really exciting. It was the first time that it was raised also in a legislative session. So exciting to have a lot of success. And it was so there's the Farm to School Collaborative is the kind of statewide network group that both Monica and I and Yukon Extension and a whole host of other partners use as our network group to kind of share what's going on in the state and generate some work and ideas. And there's a policy focused team led by 2 individuals, one from Don from Food Corps of the Northeast, and then Joey, he runs a nonprofit focused on school gardens in Connecticut, and they had a lobbyist and a pretty amazing kind of team working with them to really highlight the impact that this program could have. So I will, after I finish talking, I'll drop into the chat the legislation if anyone is interested in seeing. It's very long, part of a much longer bill, so I'll put in the page numbers. And we're still waiting to hear about funding details and exactly kind of how agency partnership will play out. But as of now, it's seeming like it's going to be a program living in with the Department of Ag, but in close consultation within the Department of Ed. And as Monica said on the federal LFSIP program, that it was very much designed with the thought of that being a pilot program for a statewide incentive program. So the hope is that this can be a relatively smooth roll in when this transitions. So the provisions that exist in the state program, there's both a local and a regional incentive. So for local, which is defined as grown in Connecticut, that's a 50%. And then for regional, which is defined as New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, that is 50%. And then we also have similar provisions of kind of what products are eligible. So we have produce, we have fish, meat, eggs, minimally processed food, and value-added dairy. So just not fluid milk, similar to the federal program. So yeah, really looking forward to kind of designing more what this program will look like in Connecticut, and very interested in hearing what other states are doing and any questions that you all have. And I will wrap it up. Thanks all.
Thank you both, Monica and Cyrena. That was amazing. And we have not very much time for questions, but I think we'll definitely share the contact information of our speakers today, as well as my contact information. You can reach out, and we do have some time. So please throw your questions in the chat. And if we don't get to them now, we'll try to get to them after and email you. But thank you all so much for all of our presenters today. Yeah, it's been really great hearing the breadth and depth of all of these flash talks. So we are going to get started with questions. Okay, Hannah asked, Robin, I may have missed it, but I didn't see your program in Maine collaborates with Department of Ag at all. Is that a relationship that has been explored in the past?
Yeah, the Department of Ag is on the Maine Farm and Seed to School network, but there is not a direct partnership with the local foods fund. I wish there was, but there isn't.
Yeah, I think I'll throw in here that it's roughly half of these incentive programs are administered by Department of Ed, and then half of programs in the nation are by Department of Ag. And there's a lot of pros and cons to each decision, working closer with schools, working closer with farmers, that kind of thing. Oh, here's a great question from Abby Halperin from the Center for Eco-Literacy, asking or saying it's interesting to see the $1 for $3 in both New Hampshire and Maine, and also there's the rebate in Connecticut as well. Curious to see how that ratio was developed in states, and whether you received any pushback on the idea of a match from school districts.
I do not know how that was developed in Maine. It's a really good question. There's never been pushback. It always is like an easy message to communicate, easy math. It's not based on, any kind of confusing metric. So it's always worked really well here in Maine.
Great. And then we have a question from Karen Spangler. I would love to ask the presenters what is the biggest misunderstanding or hardest thing to communicate about your program to local audiences?
Hi, this is Monica from Connecticut. I'm taking it from the education side, so I'm thinking more like our school food service folk. I think the biggest thing is that while there is some additional tracking that needs to be done, and I know someone referenced not wanting it to be burdensome, and that's definitely our goal as well. A lot of the purchases are things they may be already doing, so we're also trying to not get them to rework the wheel. We have some great districts that are doing some amazing local procurement, so we're just trying to give them credit for it there. And then for those who haven't done much or not sure, we are trying to show that we have a team of people ready to help them. So again, reducing the burden and acknowledging the good work already being done are two of the key things I see for the school side of things, for sure.
Great. I think we're going to close it there. Thank you, Monica. I just want to thank all of the presenters once again. Thank everyone for coming today. Thank my collaborator, Colleen Matz, as well as Karen Spangler and Sunny Baker. And as I mentioned, we will have session 2 with 5 other state program representatives on Monday, the 14th of August. And we will send out contact information. Feel free to contact me. I'm at policy@farmtoschools.org, and I'll be happy to share any resources I have with you. Okay, thanks again. Everyone enjoy the rest of your day.